Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to The Cutting Room, the show where we talk to industry-leading content marketing professionals and talk about their process, philosophy, and pregame as it relates to content marketing. I'm your host, Tommy Walker, and I am very excited to have you on the show tonight, and I'm a little nervous, to be honest with you. Our guest tonight, his name is Ryan McCready. He is currently at Reforge, which is run by Brian Balfour, previously of HubSpot fame. Before that, he was at Foundation Inc. very recently. That's Ross Simmons' company, for a lot of you who know who Ross Simmons is. And before that, he was the content marketing lead over at Venngage. He's created some really durable strategies that I very much enjoy with content marketing. One of them, which that he was doing over at Foundation, I absolutely adore, are the company breakdowns. These are detailed company breakdowns where they go deep into how different acquisition strategies work for different companies. I will be sharing that in the chat in just a bit, where you can see some examples of what that's like. And the reason I'm a little bit nervous for tonight is because it's going to be one of my articles that's on the chopping block tonight. Ryan's going to be going into it, and he's going to go into it hard. He sent me a message on Twitter probably about a half an hour ago that said, how hard can I go on this edit? So I think we're going to be okay. It's going to be a lot of fun. While we're going here, please introduce yourself in the chat. Yeah, Ryan, Ronnie, dun. Exactly. Introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us a little bit about who you are. Start up a conversation. Let's make the most of the live format, because this is the only way that we can really talk to each other in a nice dialogue. And please feel free to ask any questions of Ryan along the way. He's got a wealth of knowledge happening, and I am very excited to have this going on. So let's just invite you onto the show right now, Ryan. Boom. And here we go. Ryan, welcome to the stream. How's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm very excited. I'm a little nervous, right? I haven't put my stuff on the show yet, and I figure of all the guests that we're going to have on, I admire your work so much that I wanted it to be you. So, and I said, don't go easy on me just because I'm here. Don't go easy on me.
I don't go easy on anyone. I mean, like I said in our chat, like I want people to become better content creators. So I'm not going to pull any punches, because I respect the people. I respect the creators. I want them to get better.
I appreciate that. And the work itself. We'll talk a little bit about too, like, one of the things that fascinates me in the role of an editor is that relationship between editor and author. So that's something I'll want to get into. Before we so I don't really like a whole lot of preamble, right? We were talking about this a little bit before. So let's jump straight into it. Tell me a little bit about your content marketing philosophy and the role that it can have on a business and within an organization.
So that's a deep question, and it's something that I've been building for. I've been in content marketing now 8 years, almost 9. I've been a content creator for like 10. So it's changing at every avenue, at every company. But I think the common thread that runs through it is just like, you need to believe in creating great content. You need to, from the get-go, think you're going to create something great, instead of just checking a box. You need to, when you approach your content, you need to have a clear goal. You need to have a clear outcome. You need to be invested in it, or else you're just going to create okay content. And I think that is really what has set my content and the teams that I've been on content apart, is we really were invested in creating great content, and not just creating content to rank, but creating content that converts, creating content that gets backlinks, creating all these different type of content. So yeah, it's like I said, it's ever evolving, and I pick up little things at each turn, but I think that's kind of the through line.
Nice. I've got 2 questions for you that came up from that. The first one is, I'll go with the loaded one. Why not? How did you define quality content? What does that look like? What's the difference in the quality of quality content versus okay content?
Yeah. So quality content, I think in some places, this isn't always true. Like if you're doing like B2B or like technical writing or like super deep, like stuff that is built for developers to help them kind of set up their workspace or whatever. But I think the best content, you can feel the personality of the writer kind of shining through because they care enough about it to invest themselves into it. A lot of SEO writing right now is just like copy something that has already existed, stated a little bit differently, but you can see that it's basically the exact same thing that's already ranking. And I think the best content is that content where you can see the personality of the creator. And like all of my best teardowns, I like write in a very personable way. It's like, hey, I found this cool thing, I want to share it with you, instead of like, hey, read this ebook that I kind of care about. It's just it's seeing that personality in all of the writing.
Excellent. That leads me to a very different question than what I originally had set up. But I've worked within super large organizations and I've worked within startups, and personality, perspective, all of these things very important to the quality conversation, and the huge difference between stuff that's watered down and stuff that like actually has an impact.
Yeah.
How are you reconciling with the brands that you're working with the that balance of your own personality or perspective with what the brand is supposed to represent?
I think so. I think that's a really hard kind of balancing act to have. But I have kind of come into the camp of like it's more valuable to have like a collection of brand voices under your singular brand instead of pushing everything through a very um, branded communication platform. So instead of really doubling, tripling down on trying to grow your brand X Twitter account, maybe
Mm-hmm.
take the time to build out your 5 highest performers on your content team. They'll build better relationships. I mean, that's how I've grown in the past year, is just like doubling down on building my personal brand.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of value, and it's hard to reconcile, especially if you're working for a company who might have been founded by a developer or founded by someone who doesn't get the power of those relationships of those network. But
Mm-hmm.
um, there's a lot of good examples out there of people who do it really well, like Gong. I know Ross has written about them in the past. I see that Microacquire does it really well. Like their founder is like one one of their very big brand voices, and he just kills it. I mean, that's why I know about it. That's why a lot of people probably are big fans of it, is because he lets his personality show through all the other content.
Yeah, a couple other good ones too are like ConvertKit, Zapier.
Zapier,
These are
100%.
all.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all ones that allow their creators to have their own voice and personality. Now, as an editor, though, right? And here's kind of that question, because I know that I've experienced this myself as an editor. Where are you finding that balance of having those individual contributors? Does that look like in the team building process in the beginning? Does that look like you're obviously everything's filtering through you in editorial? Tell me a little bit about that, like finding that through line.
I think this is going to be such a cop out answer, but I think it comes down to like building trust with those writers from like day one. Like you need to be able to trust them to go out and write in their own voice, and trust them that they'll be able to fit in those parameters. I think you can set them up with some really nice lanes, like almost like operate in this lane. And then
Mm-hmm.
if you can give them that and you build trust with them and you support them and you say, maybe it could be said a little bit better by saying like this, instead of tearing them all the way down, and just giving them some more positive reinforcement to stay in those lanes to kind of build on their voice. I think that's a good way for an editor to kind of build that relationship, because it is just relationship building. It's building, like I said, the trust from the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. So twofold then. Next question here. Building that trust. Something that I've always talked about is pattern breaking. How do you break a pattern of an author and help them have their own voice, feel comfortable having their own voice? Because in a lot of cases, that's sort of beaten out of a lot of authors, especially freelancers.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the over reliance on SEO is the way, is
Mm-hmm.
another reason that voice has been beaten out. But you can have SEO you can have SEO heavy content written in a voice. I did it for years at Bengage. I mean, I injected my y'alls, my colloquialisms, my everything into all of my content, and looking back, it's still there. A couple years later, like it works. It's not. You can't have. You don't have to beat that personality out of your SEO content just to rank. I mean, sometimes it falls out just because of the type of content, but having that personality in there makes it a hell of a lot easier to build links too, because it looks like it's written by a person, and you can see, again, it comes back to having that personality and that voice in the content. It makes it easier to sell to other people because it reads like valuable content instead of just checking boxes.
Have you had to play the political game when it comes to the higher ups of getting them comfortable?
Yes and no. I mean, at Vengage, just some of the social stuff that we did wasn't always wasn't always as supported, just because it's really hard coming from a SaaS conversion driven company to tie those back to social. So that was one of kind of the places that we would butt heads sometimes. It's like, why are we doing these things on social? They're not leading to subscriptions. So that navigating that and kind of proving that out with some less than like exact numbers or metrics was tough, but like I think enough time has passed that like that's been proven by other companies that you can kind of, I think if you're playing that, if you get stuck in that political game, just build up like a deck of examples of where it's worked in your niche, or bring some actual metrics from, oh, I ran this quick test, it works, so let's do it, instead of just like, hey, I had this idea, hopefully we can get some metrics. Like bring your metrics to the table, and it's a lot easier for people to be like, okay, that makes sense, even if they're not marketers. Like, oh, that campaign you ran actually gained us 1,000 followers or some insane thing. Okay, that makes sense. We'll do it again.
Nice. Talk about that reporting process a little bit more, and what people are looking for, what you should be including from a high level. Obviously, like you can't get too granular, but like, what are the things that people care about? Or actually, rather, that's a simple question, right? People care about traffic. They care about
traffic, money,
leads, right? Like that's super simple. How are you positioning those conversations when you win, but then also when you're not doing quite as well as you want to?
So I think every experiment, again, I don't want this to be a cop out, but every experiment you learn something from. And I think that's what was great at Vengage, is we could stumble a couple times with bad experiments, but we still learned something. And then we got that out of our head, because sometimes you just need to, sometimes it might look like a great idea. You'd be like, oh, this makes so much sense. And when you run it, not really. You get okay metrics, but then you don't think about it, and then you're not diverting like focus to that. You get it, you move on, you run a post-mortem, you get some good examples or some good insights on why it did work, how it could be better, or why it didn't work. So I think just having that, I've been playing with this analogy, like it's so in like improv and comedy, like having that space to play and to really like not feel like you're going to get judged for making mistakes is super important in the content and marketing process, because you sometimes learn more from your mistakes and from your losses instead of all your wins. So
I think what's important to highlight there too is this idea as a content marketing leader, right? Like there's a difference between the individual contributor and being the leader itself, is that your job is always to step up to bat for your team. And oh, hello.
yes,
And the idea there, what you're talking about, is really trying to get the company to adopt a experimental mindset. And I think that like that's something that I don't think we haven't really talked about that enough on the show at all. But what are you doing as a leader to champion that sort of experimental mindset? One of the best things that I ever heard in my career was someone saying, Pat Laya, my first real boss in this space, was there is no failure, only learning. How are you championing that as a content leader?
So I think that, I mean, like that's at its core exactly how I approach things. There are no losses. There are no failures. I mean, you're gonna, unless you lose like a ton of money on an ad campaign. I mean, that's bad. But again, you're gonna learn something from that bad campaign. You're gonna learn something from that outreach email that you sent, that, oh, maybe including whatever, a call to action that high up doesn't work, but oh, when we send it from our personal accounts or from our non-branded accounts, it gets this many more clicks. So you're going to learn something from everything you do. And I do like that idea where where even when you do fail, you do learn something. And just like, I don't even want to call it failures because that puts a negative light. And I think that's what hurts some like new content marketers. Like, oh, I don't want to see red. I don't want to see us losing followers. I don't want to see us whatever.
Yeah.
So just kind of like flipping it on its head to learnings or to like this helps us going forward. So don't feel bad if it didn't hit right. I mean, it takes some time to get those big wins. Like you're not going to hit every single win.
I think what's important there too is the communication element between the leader and the higher up leadership, right? Um, Talking about what your hypothesis behind your experiment's going to be, going through the experiment, then doing the post mortem afterwards to give that full broad perspective. I don't see enough people in this space really talk about that, and that can lead to your content team living in kind of this black box, which then makes it so it's much more difficult for your leadership to trust you to take these
Exactly.
experiments.
Yeah, they're
The second, oh, sorry, the second part of that, right, is that um, by having that lack of trust, or not rather lack of trust, that's not the right phrase. It's also important to communicate in a way that experimenting in some of these areas, like you're just one tiny itty bitty slice of a person's day. You
yep.
make one tiny mistake, and like it's going to be gone within a couple days. You're out of the cycle, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as much as you including a broken link in an email feels like the end of the world to you,
Right.
it's for your customers unless they're real mad, which sometimes they get. But again, there's like 3 real mad people out of thousands of people that subscribe to your list. Like don't even mistakes like that, like don't let those break you down. Because like weirdly, sometimes you'll see when you send that follow-up email, you get even more clicks to it
Right.
because people are like, what is this weird thing coming in? Guess I gotta read it. So
Right. Yeah. And you send the subject line says oops, and then more
yeah,
people are like, the 70% of people who didn't open the thing in the first place are like, what are you talking about?
yeah,
So
exactly. So like
yes.
again, wins and failures. So don't beat yourself up too much.
And sometimes just don't tell anybody about this.
Yeah,
Manufacturing a mistake might not be such a bad thing
yeah,
either.
yeah,
Anyways, cool. Well, we're at the almost the 20-minute mark. I want to just plug the YouTube channel here for a second. We're going to put that into the chat. If you want to see the replays of previous episodes, we're going to have the YouTube channel. That's where all of the replays go live. After the show, we try to do it tomorrow if we get our transcription and everything done, but we try to get it within the first 24-hour period. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the philosophy. Tell me a little bit about your process, specifically your research process. And so we can stay focused, I want to zero in even more on the breakdowns,
yeah,
because I think the breakdowns are my favorite thing you've done
yeah,
ever.
yeah. So I hate to admit it, I don't have a process.
Oh,
That's what it is. Like I tweeted about it a couple weeks ago, and people took the wrong like meaning from it. I was like, I don't really have a process, and they're like, you don't have a process. What's wrong with you? And I'm like, my process is super fluid. Like my best ideas come from observing things. The Grammarly one came from me randomly looking up that keyword. The
mm-hmm.
one, same thing. I was working on a different article and saw that they were ranking with all those different keywords. Again, just went a deep dive on that. The buffer one, same thing. I stumbled upon them having 2 blogs. So when I was doing research on for another teardown, like
Yep.
that's the process. It's just staying like super curious, keeping your eyes open for everything, and diving a little deeper when you think things are weird. Because that buffer one, like I had to go on like Internet Archive and stuff like that to really figure it out, and it turned into a really good piece because I was like, this is weird. Why would such a content-driven company have 2 blogs? That makes no sense. Any SEO expert would be like, get everything under one roof. And then I found out that the reason they do is because they built the original blog on a completely different domain. So they had
Mm-hmm.
to kind of eventually be like, oh shit, oh sorry, oh damn, we have to move this.
Oh, you can no, don't worry about that.
Oh damn, we have to move this to our own domain eventually. And when they finally made that decision, they're like, we're still sitting on all these articles that are just super random and getting a ton of backlinks. So they built out a separate subdomain where they parked all those articles with a ton of backlinks that they wouldn't lose. And then they built a more SEO driven blog where they could build all the different new content clusters on it. And it's just like such a great idea on migrating a blog that probably you don't need all those random things on your SEO driven blog, but you don't want to lose all those backlinks. So it's just a master stroke figuring out how all those things work together.
Well, I think too, like, saying that there is no process is still kind of a process on its own, right?
Yeah.
I'm the same way when I write, right? When I write, it's very much this, like, it's a curiosity approach, which I love, but it's also letting one question lead to the next, lead to the next,
Exactly.
lead to the next. Now, I guess I already know the answer to this question because, and I'm starting to ask it of everyone, are you a planner or a pantser? You know what I mean by that, right?
No, what's
so are you planning all your stuff out ahead of time, or are you kind of flying by the seat of your pants as you're writing?
a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B on that. It is the one thing that I've started doing in the last year is I'll write these like massive documents of just note dumping.
Yeah.
Going from the idea, because I think a lot of people stumble when they're trying to do the research and write at the same time. When they're like, oh, what comes next? Okay, let me go find out. And then they're writing and they stumble upon that. But if you do all your research up front, find everything that you need and just brain dump it into a document, you can start pulling little crumbs from that and kind of build an outline. And like that's I guess that's my process, is like I will just do as much research as I need to, dump it into that document, and then kind of do almost like jumping from one document to the other as I'm writing, like, oh, this is how it should be structured because I want to hit point A, B, and C, but I wouldn't have known those things unless I did like the deep research and kind of just brain dumped and I wasn't thinking about the story as much when I'm doing the brain dump. And I think that helps you kind of figure out your strongest points instead of like, oh, I need to find something that fits A, B, C, instead of like, oh, these are the coolest things that I want to talk about. And then you write them out in A, B, C.
Yeah. So you're sort of absorbing everything and then letting a narrative start to flow from whatever it, like, you let that stuff percolate.
Exactly.
And then let it find the story once you've got all the information. I love that.
Yeah. That Grammarly one was a great example of that. I wrote 50% of it and then realized I wanted to go into a different direction after I outlined most of it. And then I'm like, oh, wait, I found this little tiny thing that made the story 100 times stronger and my conclusions so much better. So if I would have just wrote it deep in there as like the first idea, it would have been just an okay post. But I think just being able to like take a step back and realize, oh wait, this is what they were trying to do, really made it so much stronger.
I love that. Let's zoom out for a second, and then we're going to get into the edit in about a few minutes here. Let's zoom out and let's talk about the planning part of the process. So we've talked a little bit about the individual contributor aspect. Let's put the planner lead hat on for a second here. How are you planning out the narrative of the blog itself, and as the content strategy itself, from that high level perspective?
So I think it comes back to like, you really need to like think about what your goals are with having a blog. Some people don't need a blog. Like seriously, like stop throwing a blog on your site. Not everyone needs a blog. You could build a really strong content engine by gating all your content, by turning it into videos, by turning all that. But I feel like people hear that SEO, hear how easy SEO is, and they're like, we need a blog. But why do you need a blog? Are you converting people? Are you going after those? Do you have subject matter experts that are going to be able to write about it? Does your product even fit the search intent of those people? But people are like, we need a blog to create content. And then it does nothing after a year and they fire their content team, instead of like actually investing in wins that would lead to conversions and stuff like that. So that's I think that's what people, it's hard to listen to as a content person, that not every place needs a blog, but not every place needs a blog.
No, I love that. I really do, because, and I say this a lot. I say I love that a lot, but I really do, because especially now you're starting to see the resurgence of newsletters. You see
Yeah,
YouTubers who don't have blogs, they barely have websites in some cases. One of my favorite examples is The Hustle or Morning Brew, right? A lot of folks know who these guys are. They just got acquired by The Hustle, at least got acquired by HubSpot,
yeah,
never had a blog. And I think what's important about that is it's not even necessarily like a blog is a delivery mechanism
yeah,
for content,
yeah.
not not the content itself.
Exactly. Yeah. Like
And go ahead.
it's I was gonna say at Foundation, like blog was secondary. Our newsletter was was the strongest content asset. And we
Yeah.
probably could have kept everything on the newsletter, but we like publishing on the blog too. Like that was our most powerful asset because it had 15, 20, 30, I forget how many thousand subscribers that you're sending it directly to each week.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, let's hopefully this ranks in 6 months. I don't know, maybe.
Right. And you're in the foundation newsletter. I love the foundation newsletter and blog combination because the blog is more of an archive of the newsletter
Exactly. That's all it
than
is.
the other way around. And I think that's important because it plays to the format. Like, I think that really does play a role in the personalization element of that too. If you know that the first reader is going to be seeing it in their inbox,
Yeah.
that keeps so many things more focused. Is that something you're keeping in mind as you're creating this stuff, or as you're communicating the creation to the other people?
Yeah. Yeah. I think just when you're thinking about the platform that you're writing from, I think that needs to be in the I almost said in the back of your mind. That needs to be in the front of your mind. People
Hmm.
write threads terribly because they just like copy and paste stuff from blog content. And like
Hmm.
that's okay, cool. Like that works kind of sometimes, but you really need to think about what platform you're creating this content for and then create the content instead of like trying as much as I am a fan of repurposing. I mean, I've written about it a lot.
Yeah.
People think repurposing is one to one. We can turn this
Right.
blog article into a YouTube video, into a Twitter thread, into a whatever, and then they just like copy and paste it in when you need to like pull pieces from it. You can't
Right.
just like, say like it's going to flow like this because it doesn't fit that platform. If it did, everybody would be doing it.
Right. And you have to adapt it to the medium. Like, TikToks are very different than a YouTube video,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
it's a completely different thing. And sometimes it's hard to remember when you're in a Google Doc, right? Looking
right,
at this stuff, or even from the high level perspective of even planning all of this stuff out, where it's like,
yeah,
how are we placing our bets in these areas, especially when we create in the same sort of canvas, right? Let's see. That did bring something to mind. Oh, talking about that for a second too, going back to like the email newsletter, and that idea, it's also like super important to think about those distribution mechanisms, right? We've talked about this quite a bit. The distribution mechanisms, on how that's going to work. An email newsletter is obviously not going to have. It's not going to be SEOified,
no,
but how do you get people to join,
yeah.
right?
You get people to join by writing great content. Like that's the thing. Is like you be known for great content, and that's what I built at Foundation. Is like the new people loved our newsletter. They loved the teardowns. They loved that Ross started it, and I continued that growth um, with the newsletter. And it's just you can't put out bad content like that at the end of the day. Like, and that's how that's kind of how I became such a hard nosed editor. Is like I know the value that people are looking for in here. We can't put out bad content. So I have a very I have a very high standard of good content because I know that that people are looking for that, and they'll unsubscribe if they get a half baked idea or if they get something that isn't valuable to them.
Yeah, not a good use of their time,
Exactly. Yeah, and
right?
then you start bleeding people. So like again, I've people would say I'm a hard nosed editor or a hard editor, but it's because I know that it has to meet this like quality standard. You can't just be like, it's fine this week. You might lose 1,000 subscribers that really hate it. Like those are the
Right.
stakes. Like building those 1,000 subscribers will take 6 months. Like you know the grind. So like you can't be just being like, oh, okay, that's fine. It fits a spot. And I think you're sending me down a rabbit hole, but I think that's what a lot of SEO content has become too, is we need to put out blog posts one a week, so let's just fill it, and then we'll just check the box, and we won't do any distribution, and we won't do any repurposing, and we won't do any backlink building, and then people are confused why their SEO strategy didn't work when they might have not needed an SEO strategy in the first place. They just wanted to produce content, and then they're like, oh, because we want to produce content, we're going to make it SEO focused. But
right.
Coming back to that down at the bottom of like, do you even need a blog? Do you even need this content? Are people even looking for it?
Yeah, and you get on the hamster wheel and things start to lose their soul because you're not
exactly.
There's no heart behind any of it. Yeah, I love that. So speaking of quality content and being a hard editor, here's my favorite part of the show. People, please feel free to ask any questions as we're going along here, especially as Ryan is about to go into one of my unpublished pieces.
Got a whole notebook full of
Oh my God. All right. Share your screen. Oh God. There's quite a few people here who have been here. Yeah, exactly, Ronnie. Some people have been here for a while now. So,
okay, let's look. I'm okay. Can you guys see this now? Am I doing it right?
No, sir.
Okay.
All right. If you're having a hard time pulling that up, I'll just pull it up on my side.
So most of mine, just pull it up on yours, because I'm not going to be doing any deep edits. I'm just going to talk about structure, which is my favorite thing to talk about. So let's get into it. So first thing, I'm going to start on positive. I really like the singular sentence layout. That's like something that I love writing. That's something for the intro that you just pull people in. Like that's one of a hallmark of my writing. So I definitely appreciate when it's done well like this. That said, the intro way too long, and it jumps from idea to idea a little too quickly, and you need to kind of structure it more of introducing them to an idea at the top and then leaving them almost on a cliffhanger. I don't think it does that super well. One thing that just off the top of my mind that you could do is like, you say 27, now multiply that by 16 international markets. You could start with a big number, like whatever that is. I don't even know. I don't do math anymore. You could be like,
for a living.
Yeah, I got my degree in economics and then I forgot everything I ever learned. But yeah, like you could start with that, or use a visual to sell it really hard. Of like, you say that there's 16 international markets with 27 publishing arms. Build that visual so people get the really massive scale of what you're talking about. Let's see. Also, I struggled a little bit with like, who is this written for? Like, I know you're speaking about it, but like, who is going to find value from this? And I think one thing that I like to do is like put that up there right at the top. Like, if it's for SEO writers, if it's for marketers, like I would say as a marketer, blah, blah, blah. I use little kind of turn of phrase like that to kind of like just position it as the content for marketers. Let's see. Oh, it's also like almost 200 words long, which is a little chunky. I would cut that list. It's too much content. Working threes. That's the thing that I always get back to. Good thing that sorry. But working triplets. Like that's when you're listing things, working threes. When you're writing kind of paragraphs, working threes. I think that's a really good way to kind of keep things tight. And when you're listing examples, working threes. And then it kind of fits people's brains too. It's that weird symmetry that is asymmetrical. But let's jump into the chapter 1. So
we were talking about that with Berveen last week, where it was talking about exactly that. We're about the symmetry, and we've heard about the aesthetics of a piece just from a scanning perspective.
Yeah.
I'll
talk
and
about
also the thing I say the most to people is cut the first 2 to 500 words because of exactly what we're talking about here.
I actually wrote that down because it feels like there's two intros. You write an intro and then you get to chapter one and then you write a whole nother intro. And like that's super common in SEO writing. I notice that in a lot of people is they'll write an intro and then they'll write another intro because they don't know how to transition from the intro to the content. So they're like, might as well just write another intro. So
Guilty of the one thing I tell people to do all the time.
yeah.
All right.
One, I'm just gonna rip the Band-Aid.
Yep.
I hate when people start sections with statistics. It makes it seem like you don't know what you're talking about because you're quoting a statistic. Again, that's that personality thing where you're like, I need to be, if I'm going to write about it, like let's try to be a subject matter expert. So when people quote stats and stuff like that, I think it's kind of like a cop out of like, I don't know enough about the topic, so I'm going to pull from somebody else's.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And this is not me in defense of my piece or anything like that.
Yeah.
I've heard kind of both approaches to that.
Yeah.
I know where my training came from. It was kind of use the statistics to reinforce your authority on the matter, like show that you're well researched. How are you reconciling that?
So what I would do here is like, I'm not saying cut the statistics. I would say just move them down. And you need to, for like right at the top of that paragraph, like establish why people should care what you're saying. Like, what is your experience with this? What have you done? What have all that stuff? So just build that house with a good foundation of like, I know what I'm talking about. Here's statistics to support what I'm talking about. So
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's what I always do. Like I always want to like establish myself as a writer and an expert in whatever I'm about to talk about before I start pulling other experts into it. Yes.
I love that.
Yeah,
I really do.
Also, one nitpicky thing, but drives me actually crazy is when people introduce content. This is different than an intro, but when you say here's a statistic, that's introducing a sentence. And like I've noticed that a lot of like not low level, but like new content writers will write like you should care about this because instead of just saying it. And that's just wasting. Right. That's just wasting stuff. So just like when you're introducing your thought, you're just wasting somebody's time. So just say it. That makes sense.
It sure does.
We haven't even made it out of the first paragraph.
That's how this show usually goes. Ronnie says, so start with your take, then share the stats that back you up. Yeah.
Like establish yourself first and then use the stats to back up yourself. Like kind of like give yourself a little boost of like, this is why I think it matters. And then like introduce the expert stats of like, they agreed that it matters.
I really do think that's interesting. And I think that has to do with your research process too, right? What you were talking about before, how you're taking the brain dump ahead of time.
Yeah.
And then percolating on it, taking your own perspective and then backing your perspective up rather than basing your perspective off of somebody else. That positioning is really a really interesting dynamic. I never would have considered that.
Yeah. And it just allows you to inject your personality into it. In stuff like this, if you can be like, yeah, I spent X years doing this. This is why you should care about it. Here are a couple of my experiences. And then like, oh, it's supported by XYZ. Then you're kind of like almost tying yourself to that subject matter expert, even if you aren't one.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. I have shared the link to the document along in the chat, everybody, if you wanted to follow along live in here.
Yeah, and I would say I would take a picture of my notes, but it looks like a dinosaur. It had just like scrawled.
That's all right. I'm gonna ask for that anyways.
It's good, but like another thing that I'm still struggling with is like, who is this for? And we're like into the first section, and I'm still not really sure who this is written for or what you're gonna get from reading it. And I think like the jumping around from content silence to content cannibalization also is kind of a zigzag, and like I think focusing on, and as you keep going down, you jump between both of them. So I think just focusing on like one thought might tighten it up as well. Like you could make the whole article on content cannibalization, and then kind
Hmm.
of just tweak it a little bit, where breaking down silos is like the way that you get away from content cannibalization.
That
Um,
was something I struggled with in this piece. I really did, because it's one leads to the other.
yeah,
It's a cause and effect.
yeah,
So the question is how do you, like, the question that I was constantly trying to ask myself was where do you find that going on? And like this is a very very specific audience too, where it's like content marketers within large organizations that have multiple like larger teams that they work with. So but yeah, and but having that signposted early on, I can definitely see why that doesn't signpost early on.
yeah. Yeah, and as you're saying, this is for like big big teams, or sorry, big small teams and big companies. Like,
Yeah,
put that in the intro. Just be like, don't outright say this is for content marketers at big things, but like be like, I've been in your shoes. I did this, I did that. And you've done that pretty well with it. It just doesn't go to that second point of um, why someone should care, if that makes
right.
sense.
It does.
Okay. And then one comment before we move on is like, I think these breaking down silos should be the headers. I think it would flow a hell of a lot better if you did step one, or breaking down silos step one, sub, or like make it like 2 point breaking down silos, XYZ, whatever you want to call it. It would flow a
Mm.
lot better, because I feel like it's a little discombobulated jumping between chapters and then steps and then some subheaders and stuff like that. And it would just make it a lot easier to scan, which I am a fan of.
Is that generally where you start when you get a piece and the first thing you look at?
Is scannability? Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
100%. I think
That's
I think so many things can be highlighted, not highlighted, but just like so many things come to light when you just like do a quick scan through it. And if it's not easy to scan as an editor, who's very familiar with the content that you're writing or your writing style, it's not going to be easy to scan for a reader. So just start there and just start hacking shit off. Like, just take a section off, cut it out. I mean, sometimes I'll just go in and just delete paragraphs at a time and be like, you don't need 6 paragraphs underneath this thing. You said it in the first sentence. Let's move on.
There's a lot of that in this piece. All right, let's go.
Yeah. Again, right at the beginning, stats. That was my first. More stats / lots of fluff is the theme of chapter 2. Yeah, I think so. One thing is like, I think you could scroll down and just cut all of did not hear close. I think you could start with a study found that, like, you could just start there, like cut all the rest, and that is a lot tighter. And then
Right,
even
right here.
even like just cut that whole thing out.
Yeah,
You can link out to it, or you can just create like a visual of him like quoting whatever the quote is, and it won't super distract from the content. But yeah, cut it and start it right there, and then just cut that successful cross-functional teams have vision. Cut that header and just jump right into that. Like, I think it would flow a lot better if you just took that entire section out, unless you think it's really needed. But I think the value is in those four things right there.
right here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because those are easy to follow. Like, they have the same traits: governance and vision, focus, management, two-way delegation. Boom, out of there.
right.
You got
That
the
makes
value
sense. Yeah,
of it. Yeah.
cool. All right, moving on.
Oh yeah, comes back. My second note was like, it comes back to content cannibalization. So like, is that the through line you want running through, or is it content silos, or is it working as a distributed team? There's just a lot going on that it's kind of jumping from one topic to the next, which makes it hard for somebody to scan, or hard for someone to like see as a process, because this article is kind of built as a process, but not really. Like, there's steps in it, and there's there's subheaders and there's headers and stuff like that that follow kind of a process. But I think if you could tighten that process up, and then like I said, the step one, the step two, and kind of move some stuff around, it might flow a lot better, or it will flow a lot better.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you could really, really add some of your own personal experience into it that would make it a lot easier to read, because again, you're jumping into more examples from outside, which is completely fine. But
Yeah.
I think honestly, you could, like, this audit I would recommend, I would break down. I would make those almost subheaders. Like, why do you recommend a VP sponsor? Why do you recommend a driver? Like, you could really maybe do 2 or 3 sentences for each of them and really show that value, because you just kind of hit it and then you move on. And some people might not get why they need it, especially if they're coming from a team that doesn't do cross-sectional or really a lot of like cross-functional content creation.
I like that. Can dig into that a little bit more? Like how would you go about like going into that a little bit more? So like for me, the challenge with this piece was establishing the expertise without also like calling out the companies that I was working with.
Yeah. So
right?
I mean, you could keep it really vague. Like, you could say, like, I worked for a large enterprise marketing company that had XYZ employees. This is why I know that it'll work
Right.
for XYZ employees. Just like keep it vague, but keep those metrics in there. Give yourself something to kind of like jump off of, and it'll feel a lot more, like I said, real, personal, instead of like, because it just seems like you're vaguely touching on them, which means it gets back to that, like, do you actually have subject matter expert if you're just kind of like dancing around the points?
Right. Yeah, there's a level of timidity
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
That
what I said. Like, you could, like, one of my things is like, there's just a brief amount of personal experience, and like when you're writing something this long and this kind of like, I have experience of it, put your experience in there, and people will, I mean, it'll stand out in the content world, and people will, it's a lot easier to kind of like, to kind of trust, I guess, if you're giving those experiences.
It's funny actually. I have a friend who ended up writing their first piece for the New York Times, and they asked me to take a look at it. And one of the things I did with them, and it's almost exactly what you're talking about. So it's funny to see this, like, to hear the feedback coming in the same way, but it's also reassuring.
Yeah.
Is a good portion of that piece was all quotes from other people, and I quantified it. I said the ratio of the quotes that you have from other people versus what else is going on here. Like, I was like, I don't actually see much of you at all in this. And it's an interesting balance. That's why I'm really liking what you're saying about kind of taking your perspective and putting it first, and then finding the research to back it up, instead of here's the research. And then I never, like, honestly never would have even considered that as an editor or as a writer.
Yeah, and
right?
I think I learned that at Engage, because there's a lot of like design work, but I was writing for people like me. Like, I was writing for other marketers. I wasn't writing for designers. Like, I would be like, hey, you can trust me. I'm an idiot. I don't know design, and I can do this. So like, if you go back and look at my old stuff, I'm like, I quantify that a lot. I'm like, I am not a designer. I mean, I am now, kind of, because I've done all of it. But back in the day, like,
Right.
quantify it. I am not a designer. This is why you can trust me. I'm a marketer. I know how to do this. If I can figure this out, you can figure this out. So yeah, that's the same thing. And same with like the teardowns. Like, I mean, I have a ton of SaaS experience, but I just use Ahrefs to find all of that. That's all public knowledge. You just have to be able to like dive into it and kind of like have a curious eye. Like, all that stuff you can find, probably. I mean, even with like Google Trends or like stuff like that, like, it's not this like insane model that I built. It was Ahrefs. I mean, I use them for everything.
Right. It's funny too. Like Raveen Kumar was on last week, and he's from Shopify, or he was at Shopify before, and he was talking about the gift of ignorance, right? Finding that balance of somebody else, like a subject matter expert's curse of knowledge, combined with his gift of ignorance, and bringing those things together in the piece. So I really like that. I really like where you're coming from with that. Audience, I would love to get your perspective, or like get your thoughts on what's being said here, because it really is like, it's kind of blowing my mind a little bit here. To be honest, like, be perfectly honest, I very much appreciate this.
I'm glad I can bring some of my insane content brain that literally never turns off. That's my biggest curse, and that's kind of the thing too. Is like, I'm always looking for content ideas. You should see my Twitter drafts. It's just hundreds of content ideas that I've just like dropped in there of like, oh, this is an idea I could dive deep on, and some of those, like the Grammarly one, turned into something big, but I am drowning in content ideas. I just don't have the time to do all of them.
How are you keeping track of those?
Literally write little one-word sentences into Twitter drafts.
Yep.
In my Twitter, hit cancel so it saves as a draft, and then I'll go back and look at them. Another way is I have a template that I write threads on, and I'll just put like same thing. I'll put an idea, and then I'll list like 10 things that I want to cover, and then I'll just put it on the shelf for a while until I have time, because I work in such a blah, got to get it out there kind of thing, or else it's gone. One of my most recent ones was like, I think it was just as I was driving somewhere, I had this thought, and I literally like wrote it down at a stoplight, because it was 9 hard truths that I wish I would have learned in marketing like 10 years ago. And I literally just like listed all 9 of them out. I'm going to write a thread about it later, but just getting those ideas down, because I don't have a time to go on all of them. But once I have this bank of ideas, like when I do have time, I'm like, oh, I can just go grab from there, instead of like, I think a lot of people struggle with that, because they're like, I want to write something, but they haven't collected their ideas. They haven't really thought about it. So like they spin their wheels for too long, and then they're like, oh, it's too hard, I'm not going to write about it. But if you're constantly like have this like, they're almost like swipe files, but just have this like bank of ideas that you want to write about, that you want to dive deeper on, stuff like that, you can really create some good content.
I keep this notebook on me at all times. It's in my back pocket at all times to do that, and do exactly that. Let's see. So we've got 7 minutes left. Do you have anything else you want to say about the piece? Because you have a large list of notes there. I want to get into them.
So what's funny about you saying the quotes thing, that the advice you gave your friend is, that's my advice for the next section, is there are a lot of quotes.
There really is. Yeah. Oh, there really is.
There's like a paragraph there, and then you end it with even more quotes.
Yeah, this whole thing, like the quote goes from here, and then there's a lot of quotes in here. Like more quotes.
Yeah, images. Even more. And what's not funny, but it kind of is like, I feel like you've really put some valuable stuff in these breaking down silos things, but you don't really dive off of them. Like there's good, like in this one, like what are the overarching goals for the publishing arm? Like you could probably write a good 200 words on like, here are a couple goals that we ran into. Here's how you find them. Here's how you do that. And then then you could even, that gives you an idea for a whole nother post that you could write. And then you're building up that content hub around things like that. But like in those breaking down the silo sections, you've got really good content, but you don't take it to the next level in the actual content, in the actual kind of like chunky blog posts.
Yeah, there are several pieces within this piece.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. That's what it kind of felt like. Also, only got a couple more, but like it feels like you kind of ran out of steam for chapter 4 and 5, because it went from like 600 words to like 400 to like 200, and then it was just like the wrap up was like, bye. Time.
It's true. I worked on this piece for like a month. So you're not wrong. I haven't revisited it in almost a year. So like I haven't published it. I haven't revisited it in a while. So like
glad I could tear it down to nothing.
no, it's great. It's great because I need to revisit this piece. And I'm recording this so I can just listen to it more and more.
Yeah.
I think just to poke fun at it a little bit here too, like something that I want to do with this once I've actually got the Content Studio blog up as a blog is to have audio versions of each one. And I realized right around halfway here that I was starting to get tired of reading it. So I put in the too much to read right now. Like literally that's in here giving somebody the excuse to
I
like
wondered about that.
yeah.
It was like
well
an
it's
off ramp. It was just giving them somewhere to do
yeah.
it. That said, so one of my favorite little hacks that everyone can steal now is turning these long posts into little PDFs and using that like too much to read right now, put it right in the intro. And then you've got an easy lead gen campaign right there, especially for like thought leadership content where it's going to get a lot of shares, but it's not going to rank. So you can extract value from those thought leadership posts with using something like that.
Yeah, I experimented with that on my personal blog, which I completely neglect too regularly. Where it's at the very top, it was just the read version, the read aloud version of it, and the people who saw it, they were like, "Oh, I love that because it gives me an opportunity to listen to it while I'm driving and hear your intonation as I'm going through this. Like I'm reading it the way that it was intended to be read."
Yeah. I also want to highlight what Ronnie said in the chat is like taking feedback. Like that is the best skill a content marketer or a creator or anyone can learn to develop. Because I used to be terrible at it. I used to be like, oh, why are you attacking my work? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And Sarah McGuire, who was my editor at Vengage, was just like great about kind of breaking that feeling of like it's not an attack. It's like I want you to be better. I want this content to be better. I want us to reach our goals. That's why I'm doing it, not because I'm thinking I think you're dumb or I think you're doing that. And again, that kind of like that ties back to like what I said. Like I am a hard editor because I respect the content that I'm editing and the people that I'm editing. And I'm giving you feedback because I want you to be better, not because I think you're dumb or I want to make you feel stupid. It's because I want us to reach those goals. I want us to make this content the best we can because that's how we get there.
Yeah, I mean, you got your foot in the door in the first place, right? This is something that when I hire, it's I have a completely unscalable hiring process because I'll take my short list and in my ads, I'm always saying like, give me 3 of your most representative articles that are published, and then from there, I'll take my short list and then I'll do a deep edit into somebody's piece. Right. That's already published. So there's no skin in the game at that point. It's already gone through some other filter and whatnot. And I do that. And I tell people I do that because I want to see how they take feedback.
How they react.
If they take this defensive posture, then they might be the best writer in the world, but there's no way, there's no room for development for either of us. Right.
Yeah, there's pressures about their work and they can't see that you're trying to help them, and they can't, I don't want to say they're too arrogant, but they're almost too arrogant to see that you're doing, like I said, you're doing this because you want the piece to be better, not because you want them to feel dumb.
Well, and you want somebody who can push back on you too, right? It's not this like, and this is, I mean, we're at time now, but there's this like, this idea of hierarchy where it's like, yes, the buck stops with me. I am the final say on what gets published and what doesn't. And at the same time, it's like, yes, but I also need to improve my skills. So if I can push you and then you can push me, the content, what the audience gets is going to be the thing that that's what matters the most. It's what we're serving to people.
Exactly.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for this, man. I really appreciate that. That gives me a lot to work with inside as I go to reconstruct this entire post.
This is all a positive experience. It's positive, positive.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Someone said on Twitter, they were like, you worked for CXL. So, and I said, yes, I have skin the size of a tree, or I have tree bark type skin.
I bet.
And then Ryan's going into it with a chainsaw. So, no, perfect. Well, if you could sum it up, let's just wrap it up real quick here. your TLDR. I mean, people already watched this far, but TLDR, and then we'll close it out.
TLDR on your post or just my process?
No, just philosophy in general, like where you're coming from.
TLDR, not every brand needs a blog, but they still should be creating content. You need to find where your content works, where your people are, and create content for those people. Don't just create a blog because you think you need it or because you think it's easy. Create content that helps your customers, helps you, helps everyone reach their goals. I think that needs to be remembered, and it's content is being pushed as this easy win for some companies, and they don't need, like I said, they don't need a blog, they don't need all these things, but sometimes they get invested and it's too late, and the company goes down.
And it's anything but easy.
Yeah,
and everybody here really knows that. So
yeah, they get sold on it, and then they see that it's not easy.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you coming on. This was incredibly insightful. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Anybody here, the replay will be sent out in the newsletter tomorrow, or in the newsletter tomorrow in the replay. Ryan, I would love to get your notes so we can take a picture of that. And if you want to check out the replay, we also have it on the YouTube channel, and we just on the email list started putting together replays from all the previous episodes with all the insights and the links to all the resources from before. So lots of cool stuff going on. I really appreciate everyone for your support along the way. And thank you so much, Ryan.
Awesome.
Everyone have a great rest of the night.
It's great. Bye, guys. Have a good night.